Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Violence in Lethbridge as a woman is attacked at an ATM machine by a local bank. An Alberta pastor could face jail time for consistently holding full worship services during the pandemic. And part one of our Bridge City News exclusive discussing the pros and cons of open pit coal mining in the Alberta Rockies.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Federal Conservative leader Erin O'Toole is firing back after Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland accused his party of dragging its feet on passing a COVID-19 relief bill. O'Toole says Bill C-14 is intended to fix problems with the government's previously passed relief bills and that Trudeau is only engaging in moderate debate. The bill includes billions of dollars in new measures to top up and expand existing COVID-19 aid programs. The Trudeau Liberals have tabled a bill that will let municipalities ban handguns through bylaws restricting their possession, storage, and transportation. Trudeau says the bill also proposes a buyback of recently banned firearms that are considered assault-style weapons. He says more needs to be done to end gun violence in Canada. The new bill would increase criminal penalties for gun smuggling and trafficking. It would also create new offenses for altering the cartridge magazine of a firearm and introduce tighter restrictions on importing ammunition. Today's announcement was disappointing news for many gun control advocates who wanted to see a national handgun ban. An intense scene unfolded over the weekend in Lethbridge when a heroic bystander came across a woman being assaulted by a man, so he decided to step in and help. Jeanette Rocher has the details.
When I arrived to this area right here, that's when I know.
Eden Rodriguez describes an unnerving scene that he walked into on Friday night. When he turned the corner into this ATM vestibule, this is what Rodriguez saw.
You need to let her go.
So he pulled out his phone and hit record.
I was a female asking for help. She seemed pretty distressed, and the guy was on top of her. And I asked him to stop, to let her go. And the guy said that he was teaching her a lesson.
The incident happened here at the RBC on the corner of 7th Street South and 4th Avenue South. According to Rodriguez, his phone said it was just before 9 p.m. when he decided to intervene.
I hold him by his jacket and poke him a little bit, and then he got threatening. I also got pretty intense, yelled at him really loudly, and he kind of got scared, and he tried to grab me by the neck and the jacket.
Rodriguez says once he got the attacker off the victim, he had the woman go stand outside.
Just kept the guy inside. I blocked the door so he wouldn't go anywhere until I called the authorities to come and deal with it.
Obviously, we really appreciate his actions. When citizens choose to get involved, that is their right. They can choose to get involved. We always want them to make sure they're being cautious and calling us as soon as they possibly can so that we can get there quickly. And we're trained. We have tools to deal with situations like that if we need to. Whereas citizens, they are putting themselves in harm's way. They have to realize that they don't know how people are going to react when they intervene.
I have daughters, right? And I wouldn't like them to be in that situation. I just had to help, and that's what I did.
For Bridge City News, I'm Jeanette Rocher.
Firefighters in Coaldale were called out to a house fire around 6:30 p.m. on Saturday night. Fire officials reported that fire was coming out of the 3-unit single-story residential building when they arrived. Fortunately, 2 people got out safely and there were no injuries. The fire was under control within half an hour while containing the bulk of the fire damage to the center unit. In total, 21 firefighters battled the blaze. Damage was estimated at around $100,000. The cause of the fire was determined to be the accidental storage of combustible materials on the top of the oven. One person is dead following a collision between 2 semi-trucks in southern Alberta. Police say the crash occurred just before noon on Monday on Highway 526. The lone driver of the eastbound semi, a 29-year-old man from Calgary, died at the scene. The man driving the other truck, along with his child passenger, were taken to hospital with minor injuries. Traffic was diverted for several hours and the road was finally reopened around 10 p.m. that evening. The accident site is about 50 kilometers north of Taber. Police say at this point, no charges have been laid, but the crash remains under investigation. The province announced today that COVID-19 cases keep coming down across Alberta. Over the past 24 hours, just 263 new cases have been identified. There are 365 Albertans in hospital with the virus, including 56 in intensive care. Now, provincially, there are still 4,993 total cases, and to date, more than 122,000 Albertans have now recovered from the virus. As for the new variants in our province, Dr. Dean Henshaw says they've been discovering around 12 new variants each and every day.
I know that many Albertans are concerned about these variants, and I am too. I am particularly concerned about the growing number of cases not linked to travel, though many of these cases are the results of close contacts who we have identified through robust contact tracing. This includes offering testing twice to anyone who may have been exposed to a variant case. We are actively monitoring the emerging research on these variants and looking to see if any of our current guidelines or approaches need to change, beyond the adjustments we have already made to limit opportunities for spread.
Here in the South Zone, there are 344 total cases of COVID-19, including 211 here in Lethbridge and 18 in Medicine Hat. Lethbridge College received 2 new vehicle donations today from Dunlop Ford for their automotive training programs. As Micah Quinn explains now, the vehicles will allow students to get hands-on training when it comes to the latest in automotive technology.
A 2020 Ford Expedition and Ford F-150 were distributed to Lethbridge College's automotive training programs today by Dunlop Ford and Ford of Canada.
And so I'm really pleased to be part of this contribution, like I say, in partnership with the Ford Motor Company. We give the students an opportunity to work on some new vehicles, the latest technology. So I think it's a win-win for everybody involved.
Dunlop says that these new vehicles will provide connectivity features that the college hasn't been able to access before.
And both of these vehicles have the latest in Sync 3, they call it, at Ford technology and connectivity.
Sheldon Anderson is the Dean for the Centre of Trades at Lethbridge College, and he says that the biggest challenge for colleges and other post-secondary institutions right now is finding sustainable funding.
And if you look at the total value of these vehicles, for us to keep current in all of our trades is a huge capital demand. And whenever we can get support from industry, it really helps us to be able to train on the newest and greatest things. Also with this donation, they provided their ACE software and program, which helps students become more excited about the trade and also be able to have the latest information systems, which is also key and also a challenge to stay current on all the newest training procedures and that goes along with these vehicles.
Dunlop says that quite a few students from the automotive training programs at Lethbridge College are currently still working for Dunlop Ford. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
The Tabor Lost Paws Society has a new building after 2 years of fundraising to help out some of our four-legged friends. Carolyn Terpstra is the Society's president, and she says that even though they have a new building, the Society still needs to fundraise for the outer portion of the building.
We still need to fundraise for all the stuff that goes outside, like the outdoor kennels, perimeter fencing, the grass work, landscaping, that kind of things. So obviously we can't do any of that in the winter. So we're looking forward to getting that finished. So hopefully we can have a grand opening by July is having all that complete as well. We've also been applying for grants and stuff too. We've got a couple of them we just finished applying for. So it's an ongoing process because we are all volunteers.
To make a donation to the Society, you can contact them directly. February is Black History Month. Now, Black history in Southern Alberta is as long as our white history. When it comes to specifics, however, there are many unknowns. Belinda Crowson with the Lethbridge Historical Society says over the past 5 years, her group has been determined to build their archive, highlighting some of the Black trailblazers in our region.
There are people who were enslaved, who after the war come west and work in the fur trade. We know of Black cowboys. We know of porters. Certainly working on the train for the CPR was a job many of the Black men could get. So we know there were Black porters, but there were also tailors, restaurant owners. There were all jockeys. There were many, many working in various businesses. And what I have discovered is up until the 1920s, there was quite a Black history in Lethbridge, and then many people left.
Now, if you're interested in learning more about Crowson's archives or have something you want to submit, you can reach out to the Lethbridge Historical Society on Facebook. This week, we celebrate Pancake Tuesday or Shrove Tuesday. It's a day when many Christians prepare for Easter. That means people will be loading up on flapjacks, butter, lots of syrup to prepare for 40 days of fasting before the start of Lent. This year, however, will look a little bit different since many churches are not able to congregate at full capacity.
Traditionally, a lot of parishes on the Sunday before Ash Wednesday, they would have pancake breakfasts and that kind of thing, which were a really big deal. All the families in the parish trying to come together. Shrove Tuesday in this parish was always, there would have been 3 or 4 pancake meals this evening. And that's not going to happen because we can't social gather and we can't celebrate in the way that we usually would. The schools, the same thing. It's like all the schools, the elementary schools in this parish have always had Shrove Tuesday pancakes and sausages and that kind of thing, and it's a big deal for them, right? It's a mindset thing, it's a celebration thing just before we start the Lenten journey.
The Alberta pastor who hosted church services near Edmonton has been arrested and could possibly face jail time. Pastor James Coates of Grace Life Church, along with hundreds of congregants, have been taking part in regular church service and worship for weeks without masking and physically distancing. Now, that's a major no-no right now with the province's current health measures to stop the spread of COVID-19. Churches are allowed to host, but only at 15% capacity in their buildings. The Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms is representing Pastor Coates, along with many other pastors across the country. Joining me now, just outside of Calgary, is James Kitchen, one of the group's lawyers. James, could this pastor possibly face jail time for hosting a church service?
Perhaps not today. He's appearing for a justice of the peace and he may be released on conditions. But if he continues to hold services, it is likely he will eventually be imprisoned. And that will be up until the time that he has a trial or a hearing on what he's been charged for.
So what's the reasoning behind holding full church services during the pandemic?
It's because of what he believes, right? He is a pastor, is a shepherd of his church, and his church people, they believe that Christ commands them through the scripture to meet as the full body of Christ and to worship and be with each other, fellowship with each other, and that is important, and it's a matter of obedience to Christ. And when that comes in conflict with the government, obedience to Christ trumps.
So tell me how you're able to represent this pastor and others across Canada right now holding full church services.
In this case, we're going to court, and we're trying to represent the church as they exercise their charter freedoms to be able to operate and to keep their pastors out of jail. Ultimately, though, also there's a lot of advice, which is this where it's at with a lot of the other pastors that haven't gotten to this state because they're exercising their section charter 2 freedoms, and that's what we do. That's our bread and butter. So we help people who are doing that. We defend their rights.
That was lawyer James Kitchen with the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms joining me from just outside of Calgary. The Grassy Mountain Coal Project has become a hot-button topic for many Albertans. The proposed open-pit coal mine outside of the Crow's Nest Pass is welcomed by some, but rejected by others. Bridge City News video journalist Ainsley O'Reilly examined the pros and cons of the open-pit coal mine. In part 1 today, the focus is on education.
Coal, Canada's most abundant fossil fuel. Coal is a mineral that's formed from the remains of plants, buried hundreds of millions of years ago. It forms under intense heat and pressure. Coal is used to generate electricity, produce wind turbines, cement, aluminum, and steel. It even powers electric cars.
You have a number of developing countries that want to have the same lifestyle that we have in North America. And to do that, they need infrastructure. And to have that infrastructure, they're going to need steel. And to need steel, you need coal.
Does Alberta want to define itself as the place that just continues to pump out raw resources faster and faster and faster because the global population wants it?
There are 2 types of coal. Thermal, it's lower grade, has a lower energy content and higher moisture. This coal powers 41% of the world's electricity. Then there's metallurgical coal, or coking coal.
It's used for making steel, which is a fundamental building block of our economy. So Canada is lucky to have some of the world's finest.
The most common way to extract these minerals is through open pit coal mining. Instead of drilling a hole and creating underground tunnels, a technique called surface mining extracts from an open pit in the ground. But how is this relevant to southern Albertans? The last mine in the Crow's Nest Pass closed in 1983. Up until recently, the Rocky Mountains and Eastern Slopes prohibited open-pit coal mining. In 1976, Premier Peter Lougheed introduced a coal development policy for Alberta. in order to set limits for the land, stating, "No mines should cause irreparable harm to the environment." In May of 2020, the UCP government rescinded this policy with the exception of Category 1 land, opening the doors for exploration for the first time in 44 years. And then on February 8th, the government retracted, saying they made a mistake.
An important part of being a responsible government is to admit when you've made a mistake and to fix it. And that's what we are doing here today.
Category 2 lands are closed for business, pending widespread consultations and introducing a new coal policy. Category 4 land is still available, which includes the highly debated Grassy Mountain Coal Project.
About 7 kilometers north of Blairmore in the Crow's Nest Pass. The project itself has a footprint of 1,500 hectares, and it'll be producing about 4.5 million tons of metallurgical coal every year for 23 years.
Australian-owned Riversdale Resources has been interested in the area since 2013. In 2016, the wholly owned Benga Mining Company sent out its initial application. The project is currently under review after a joint panel with the federal and provincial government met over several weeks.
This is about the ramifications for the Lethbridge area and for the irrigation communities.
Representing the public interest, this is an area that is vastly important, not just for things like fish and wildlife, but although those are also very important to the public, but water.
The panel's purpose is to determine if the project is safe for the environment, and ultimately, if it gets the green light. The results are expected to be in by June of this year. There are two sides: people who want to see Grassy Mountain up and running and give Albertans jobs after the oil industry's collapse and a global pandemic left thousands without work. And then there are ranchers, homeowners, locals, and people from all over the country who are concerned about the environmental effects coal mining will immediately have on the land and for generations to come. Stay tuned for part 2 as questions become answers. How does the Indigenous community feel? How many jobs will be created? What about the water, the fish, tourism? For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
In part 2 tomorrow, Ainsley will examine the impact the open pit coal mining will have on our economy. That Arctic air that moved into the Prairie region 10 days ago is finally moving away, taking many of the record cold temperatures with it. In fact, Environment Canada says many records that were broken go back 50 years. Well, we're slowly getting back to more seasonal values, and full weather details are coming up. It was so good to finally see the cold Arctic air mass leave southwestern Alberta, bringing more seasonal values, wasn't it? Jeanette Rocher is here now with a full look at the weather picture. Jeanette, no more minus 30, minus 40 for the next while. In fact, we may even see some plus temperatures later this week.
Plus temperatures are expected towards the end of the week and even double digits by the weekend. But until then, minus 16 is our overnight low tonight. Minus 7 as we get into Wednesday with a chance of flurries. Minus 3 our expected high for Thursday under sunny skies. Mix of sun and cloud expected on Friday with a high of 2 degrees. 2 also expected on Saturday with sunny skies. And then a high of 11 degrees for both Sunday and Monday. Putting us back into our seasonal averages, or actually even higher than that. Average high for this time of year, 2 degrees. Average low, minus 10. 14 was our high temperature back in 2002. And our lowest day on record was minus 35 back in 1938. Sun rose this morning at 7:39 a.m. and our sun set this evening, 5:52 p.m. Looking at the west coast, BC has moved out of that Arctic outflow warning and has sunshine. Victoria's high 6 degrees, 5 degrees expected to be the high in Vancouver tomorrow, minus 9 in Edmonton and minus 7 in Calgary. Looking at the rest of the prairies, minus 17 in Saskatoon with a chance of flurries. Flurries also expected in Regina tomorrow with a high of minus 15. Minus 16, the expected high in Winnipeg as the extreme cold warning has ended there. Looking to central Canada, Toronto's high minus 3, minus 6, the expected high in Ottawa with sunny skies. Sunshine also expected tomorrow in Montreal with a high of minus 7, but lots of wind, 40 kilometers per hour. Much of Atlantic Canada is under a freezing rain warning. Fredericton could see some flurries tomorrow, -2 the high, 0 the high in Halifax, -1 in Charlottetown, and 8 degrees the expected high in St. John's, Newfoundland, with rain. There you go. That is your forecast.
A COVID-19 outbreak at a Central Alberta pork processing plant prompted operators to temporarily close the facility. Ole Mill said in a statement that it no longer believes its plant in Red Deer can be operated safely and efficiently, despite measures that it's taken to curb the spread of the novel coronavirus. A provincial spokesperson said there were 326 confirmed cases, with 192 connected to the outbreak. The company said the outbreak began in November, but it wasn't until January 20th that there was a significant rise in infections, with one person later dying from the virus. The Canadian Real Estate Association says home sales were up 35.2% last month from a year earlier and up 2% from December. It says the national average price of a home soared to $621,525. That is up from 22.8% from the same month last year. The gains came as the national sales on new listings ratio rose to 90.7%. That is the highest level on record. CREA says market conditions were pushed to record levels due to a lack of supply as Canadians held off listing their homes during the pandemic. After soaring to new heights last week, Bitcoin is crossing the $50,000 US mark. The digital currency rallied last week as more companies believe Bitcoin could gain widespread acceptance as a means of payment for goods and services. That includes Elon Musk and Tesla, which announced last week it would soon accept it as a payment for its high-end cars. Bitcoin was up around 4% earlier today. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 32 points in the day to finish at 18,492. The Dow was up 64 points to 31,522. The S&P 500 was down 2 points to 3932, and the Nasdaq was down 47 points on the day to 14,047. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 70 cents to $60.17 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 19 cents to $3.10 US. Gold was down a cent to $17.9445 US an ounce, and silver was even at $27.25 US an ounce. Wheat is at $307 per metric ton, barley's at $310, canola's at $7.40, and corn is at $341 per metric ton. Live cattle were down $1.05 to $116.15. Feeder cattle were down 8 cents to $139.93, and lean hogs were up 98 cents to $86.18. The Canadian dollar was unchanged over the past 24 hours at 78.79 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the Trudeau Liberals have tabled a bill that will let municipalities ban handguns through bylaws restricting their possession and storage along with transportation. Trudeau says the bill also proposes a buyback of recently banned firearms that are considered assault-style weapons. Coming up, a Q&A with the past president of World Vision USA about how vision for your church and business is vital during the pandemic. That interview with Richard Stearns and Jeanette Roche is coming up in just a moment.
Is success overrated? Today's guest seems to think so, even though he's been incredibly successful. Richard Stearns is President Emeritus of World Vision US, a former corporate CEO at both Parker Brothers and Lennox, and the author of Lead Like It Matters to God. He joins me via Skype from Seattle, Washington. Richard, thank you so much for joining me today. It's great to have you on the show.
It's great to be here.
Okay, so first off, I don't think you're saying that success is a bad thing necessarily, right? But it shouldn't be our biggest focus.
Well, that's right. You know, we live in a success-obsessed culture. You know, we celebrate the wealthiest people, the winningest teams, the biggest churches, the fastest growing companies. And so we're all kind of marinating in this success-oriented culture that makes success the goal of our lives and our careers. And I like to say in my book that success is not a bad thing, but our goal as Christian leaders should be to be faithful. We want to be faithful leaders. We want to demonstrate with our character, the character of God, the character of Christ, to our coworkers and those around us. And so I make the statement, which is unusual for a leadership book, that success is overrated. I do believe that if you practice the values that I talk about in the book, that you probably will be more successful. But again, success is a byproduct, not the goal. God is not impressed by the title on our business card.
That's so true. So do you think that we're all called to be leaders in some fashion?
Well, I think yes, absolutely. One of the myths about leadership is that leaders are rare, and we celebrate and put certain leaders on pedestals, and we think, wow, they're the leaders and we're not. But most of us in life are leaders in some context and followers in another context. So you may have a day job where you don't have many leadership responsibilities, but you might be a leadership in your community. You might be coaching a soccer team. You might be a leader in your church. So all of us are leaders in some way or another, and that's why leadership is important.
Now, the name of your book is really interesting, Lead Like It Matters to God. So that sort of begs the question, what does matter to God when it comes to leadership?
Well, I think God is concerned about the character of a leader. How do we represent God as we go into our leadership positions? And how do we treat the people that are around us? They could be above us or below us in an organization, but the people kind of entrusted to our care, it's about how do we treat those people, and how do we see them? Do we see them as people made in God's image that are worthy of our respect and our care? Or is our leadership, as it often is, sadly, all about ourselves, all about the leader getting ahead and being successful and just using people to get there, instead of looking at the people as my job as a leader is to help the people under me succeed and to bring out their God-given talents and gifts. And a successful leader is one that helps others realize their goals and their dreams and realize their God-given potential.
Interesting. You write that how we lead is actually, it matters more than the actual outcome. So why would that be?
I think sometimes we all imagine that day we might stand before God and give an accounting for our life. And I try to imagine that day, and I can't imagine God saying to me, Rich, we were just so impressed that you became a CEO when you were 33. You killed it. And when you were at Lennox Tableware, we were just so impressed for your 20 consecutive quarters of earnings growth. I don't think God is really impressed. It's not those things aren't important, but I don't think those are the things that impress God. God is much more concerned about how did we live our lives? How did we lead? How did we treat other people? How did we manage our money? How did we manage our families? And those are the things that will matter in the end. Sometimes I ask people, if you could write your own obituary, what would you want it to say? Would you want to say, I made all these real estate deals, or I started this company, I did this, or I made $1 million a year before I was 30? Probably if we wrote our own obituaries, we'd want them to talk about the people in whose lives we made a difference, the people we cared about and who cared about us. We'd want to talk about the human side of our lives and the relationships that mattered, not so much our achievements.
Mm-hmm. In your book, you write about 17 different character traits that are important for leadership. So you say that a couple of these are very important in today's climate, and that would be perseverance and vision. So can you elaborate on that?
Sure. I do write about these 17 leadership values. They're things like integrity and humility and encouragement and forgiveness and balance in our lives. But I think in this time of COVID, it's been a very challenging time for leaders. I'm actually glad to be retired right now and not leading World Vision because I don't envy my successor there. But I think perseverance and vision are related, and they're critical right now. People are disconnected. Many people are working from home, and they don't have the usual camaraderie and fellowship of working together in a setting with other people. And so you start to lose the vision. You start to lose your sense of purpose. Why are we here? What are we trying to accomplish? You don't even see the other members of the team except virtually. And so I think a leader needs to really maintain a compelling vision for the team that they're leading, reminding them constantly of what we're trying to do together and how we're going to accomplish it, and kind of a vision for a better future, because the present isn't all that great. And So the leader has to help the team see that light at the end of the tunnel and remember that, hey, we're going to get there and we're going to get there together. And then perseverance is the other side of that coin, that in the meantime, we all have to persevere. And when a leader shows that they can persevere, they encourage the people who work for them to believe that they can persevere as well. We'll get through this together. So I think those two qualities are particularly important right now.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Now, Richard, is there one thing about leadership that you wish that you had known about when you first began your career?
Yeah, there is. I get asked that question a lot, and the benefit of age is wisdom. And you look back and you say, these are the things I wish I knew when I was 25 or 35 years old. And I think the one thing that I focus on is the power of encouragement. A leader who is an encourager of people, encouragement brings a huge return on investment, and it's actually free. But many leaders take an approach of criticism. So you look at a person who's doing a job, maybe they work for you, and you tend to focus on the negatives, right? What are they doing wrong, and what do I want them to do better? Instead of looking at that person and seeing all of their gifts and talents and affirming the things they're doing well. I say in the book, imagine if you are a track runner, in high school or college, and you're on the 4x4 relay team. And so you run a race at a track meet, and you kind of bungle the handoff a little bit, so you lose a second and your team loses the race. Now, what if you work for a coach who says, you really messed up that handoff. If you don't fix that, we're never going to get to the state championship. You just really screwed up today. Well, that's one coach. What about the other coach that says, that was one of the best relay legs I have ever seen you run. If you can just work on that handoff a little bit, we're going to win the state championship. Well, I want to run for the second coach because he's encouraged me. He said, look at what you did well. And you've just got this one thing to work on. And if you fix that, the sky is the limit. So encouraging people is something that, again, it's free and it makes a huge difference in the morale of the team that you're leading. And they will rise to that challenge if you just give them a little pat on the back from time to time. There's a place for criticism, but you don't lead with it.
I love that. So you mentioned humility before. So when someone's in a leadership role, it naturally comes with a bit of attention and limelight, right? So what does a leader need to do to walk in humility?
Well, the first thing I say is leaders shouldn't believe their own press clippings, because you read your own press clippings and your head gets big and you get full of yourself and you start to think it's all about you. And Rick Warren, the pastor down here in California, in his book, The Purpose-Driven Life, he said this about humility. Humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. So in other words, sometimes we think humility means that we're not gifted, or we're not proud of the strengths that we have as leaders. And that's not it at all. It's really about thinking less of yourself and more of others, more of the team, the greater good, and using those really great skills that you do have as a leader to lead your team and to accomplish things together. But a humble leader, nobody likes to work for an arrogant leader. An arrogant leader is a person who thinks, well, I have all the answers, so the rest of you are just chopped liver. I mean, why should I listen to your opinions because I have all the answers? I'm the smartest one on the team. Nobody wants to work for that person. But a humble leader says, we all have something to contribute, and your ideas may be better than mine, and I want to listen to what you have to say and what you have to contribute, and then we'll do it together. We'll make a good decision and we'll do things together. So humility's important.
Yeah, you have all these great things on your list, and integrity, of course, is on your leadership characteristic list. So practically speaking, what should that look like?
Well, I call integrity the North Star of leadership. If you don't have integrity, just go home, and again, nobody wants to work for a leader who has no integrity. And so what does integrity mean? I talk about it in my book in two dimensions. There's relational integrity, right? The integrity you have in the relationships with your coworkers. And that means keeping short accounts and, forgiving people when they mess up and asking for forgiveness when you mess up. it means that you're a person of your word. You're a person who can be trusted. People trust you to make fair and just decisions in the workplace. And so when a leader has that kind of integrity, everybody on the team is relaxed because they trust the leader. They trust the leader to do the right thing. And they don't have to always be looking over their shoulder or worried about, I don't know if I can trust the leader with this or piece of information or that piece of information. But then there's another kind of integrity I call organizational integrity, where the leader sets the tone for a whole organization. What are the expectations for integrity on this team and in this organization? And you set expectations that I expect people to be truthful and honest and fair in all of their dealings, and not being a person of integrity is acceptable if you work on my team. And that gives clear boundaries and guidelines to the people that work for you, and it sets the tone for the whole organization so that you have an organizational culture characterized by that kind of integrity as well.
Mm-hmm. Did you compile this list by trial and error? Is that looking back on your career, are there things that you wish that you would have done differently? Was this wisdom developed over time?
Well, there's no question it was wisdom developed over time. Some of these things I learned the hard way. I made mistakes and didn't act the right way, and there were consequences to that. And so, hindsight is always 20/20. And my goal in writing the book was that hopefully it would be helpful for younger leaders who are early in their career or mid-career, and they're trying to be better leaders, and they're trying to be better ambassadors for Christ in their workplace, even if it's a secular workplace. And I think right now, Jeanette, we're living in a time when our values are kind of under assault. If you look at U.S. politics, I don't have to say anything more about values: integrity, humility, forgiveness, encouragement, generosity. We're not seeing that in many of our political leaders. But you look at corporate scandals, you look at the Me Too movement and all of the scandals that has revealed in almost every sector of our society. And then sadly, within the church, there have been scandals and difficult things. So right now, it seemed like a very timely moment to write a book about leadership values, that character matters, and that character is actually the main thing. Most of us would rather work for a leader who had a sterling character than a leader who had great competence but was a horrible person. And character goes a long way toward making a person a successful leader.
Yeah, no, that's true. You make a lot of sense. And you mentioned before about being ambassadors, right? And that can sometimes be challenging if you're working, especially in a secular company. So did you ever get admonished for being too religious, so to speak?
So I worked 23 years in very secular work environments, Parker Brothers and Lennox, and I made it a point to always have a big leather Bible on my desk, because I wanted people to know that I was a person of faith. I didn't want to shove it down their throat, but I wanted it symbolically people would know, because, Rich has got a Bible on his desk. I never tried to proselytize or force my faith on people, but it was amazing how many times people had noticed that Bible. And of course, they knew I went to church and I was involved in a youth group and my kids were in a Christian school. And when they were going through a hardship in their life, they would come in and shut the door and say, "Can I talk to you and get a little advice? And, you seem like a person of faith and values." And so, our character in a workplace is really our witness. And there's a scripture in 2 Corinthians 5:20 that when I was at World Vision, I had it literally stenciled on my wall, painted on my wall. And it goes like this: "We are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God is making his appeal through us." So wherever you work, I mean, you could work at Amazon or Google or a TV station. God is making his appeal through you in that place where you work. And that's an amazing responsibility. That's actually our main job as followers of Christ, to be his ambassador. And we might do that in a secular workplace. We might do that in the government, in an educational institution, or we might do it in a Christian ministry. But if we think about ourselves as ambassadors, we'll behave differently in the workplace.
Yeah, and it's amazing the doors that it can open, like you just shared the example there. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Richard. It looks like we are about out of time, but thanks for writing such a great book on values-driven leadership. Appreciate having you on here.
It's great to be on your program, Jeanette. Have a great day.
COVID-19 has not only impacted our health, but also disrupted relationships and businesses. Our guest today believes that now is the time to see the workplace not just as a paycheck, but as a place to demonstrate truth and the reality of faith. But how do we do this when our world is so hostile right now to Christian values, or appeared hostility? David Gill is the author of 9 books, one of which we're featuring today called Workplace Discipleship 101, and he joins me now from Oakland, California via Skype. David, welcome to Bridge City News.
It's great to be with you.
Now, you start out by distinguishing between the workplace and the marketplace. What's the real difference here?
Well, what I'm really interested in is what does our faith, what does our confession that Jesus is Lord mean for our work? Okay, and a lot of things have been written about this. It's kind of a movement of the last 30 or 40 years. Some of the literature talks about marketplace ministry, and some of it talks about theology of work and that kind of thing. I prefer talking about workplace discipleship because marketplace puts the emphasis on the exchange, buying and selling, exchanging, trading, and that is important work. We want Jesus to be Lord of our market activities, but there are a lot of things in the workplace that are, for example, raising children, that's not a matter of the marketplace. It's a matter of us exerting ourselves to try to deliver products and services that glorify God. So I view everybody works. Some of them work in marketing. A lot of times we hope we get paid for our work, but just being paid doesn't make it work. Work is where we put out an effort to create products and services that glorify God and meet the needs and sometimes the wants of people, of our neighbors and people around us.
So what are some of the major challenges people face in today's world in being a workplace disciple?
Well, I think, externally speaking, of course, the rise of technology and robots and artificial intelligence, this is displacing some traditional work. People are losing jobs in manufacturing because robots are taking over, but that's also true in medicine and a lot of other fields as well. So certainly technology is a great challenge. Globalization means we're competing with workers from all over the world, and sometimes that creates disruptions. But of course, COVID is the latest thing, and this is a massive disruption where some people have lost their jobs, and most of the rest of us are working much more from home. So that's a huge challenge these days. But I would actually say, Hal, the biggest challenge of all is the fact that Christians haven't thought enough about this, and we don't really know what it means for Jesus to be Lord of our work. We're not seeing the lessons of Scripture. And, I often say Jesus had more to say about money, property, and wealth than he did about heaven and hell and a whole lot of other subjects that are very important, but still we tend to neglect and overlook, and we don't, and a lot of times our pastors aren't really prepared by their seminary or Bible school backgrounds to see those lessons, and often our pastors don't have any experience working out in workplaces outside of church turf.
Now you list 5 steps that believers need to prepare themselves in order to be most effective in the workplace. Name some of those steps.
Well, the first step is to make the commitment, because I think just like almost anything, getting fit, for example, it's not going to happen if we approach it randomly and say, well, I better get fit this year. No, we've got to actually make a commitment, share that with others who will hold us accountable and support us. So making the commitment, I think, is the first thing, to say, I am going to commit myself to honoring Jesus Christ in my work. Secondly, it's learning how to connect our work with our prayer life. I talk about how we're really good at emergency prayers about our work. Lord, I'm about to get fired, or Lord, they're harassing me at work, or something like that. But we need to be more proactive in our prayer life, where we pray for guidance and strength before we go to work, and in a more holistic, anticipatory way, not just throwing up our crisis prayers to the Lord. The third step is to listen. So prayer is talking to God in a simple sense, but reading Scripture is listening to God. So I have a chapter about how to read our Bibles, looking for those workplace lessons. A fourth step is partnering, creating what I call a posse. It's not good for man to dwell alone. Jesus sent his disciples out 2 by 2. We need to have partners who are praying with us and supporting us. So I feel like individualism is a great enemy, really, that undermines our capacity to honor Christ in the workplace. We need prayer partners, people who understand our work, and we can share what's going on with them. And then the fifth step is what I call lifelong learning, where we as disciples of Christ, we want to get better at our jobs. So we want to study in order to be as good as we can be, deliver excellence at work. But it's also about wisdom. So much of the knowledge and information in the world today is bits and pieces of breaking news and opinions and things like this. We need a deeper kind of wisdom that comes out of Scripture, but also I recommend reading more history of our profession, for example, history and stories of Christian leaders who we can learn from. So there's a whole agenda that I describe in my fifth step there of preparation to deepen our knowledge base and, above all, our wisdom base.
Now, you refer to workplace discipleship as very hard work. Why is that?
Well, any kind of discipleship is going to have challenges. In this world, you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I've overcome this world. And we know the most faithful disciples in history. Well, first of all, our Lord, he was perfect in his work. He did the work of his Father. Before Jesus went to the cross, he prayed in his prayer and said, "Father, I've glorified you by finishing the work that you gave me to do." And then he did the work on the cross. So there's always going to be a bearing of the cross. There will be some opposition there. We live in a fallen, broken world. And so to say, I want to follow Jesus Christ, as you said at the very beginning, there may be some opposition from people that we work with or from our bosses, but there's also just exhaustion and complexity and all of these things. But what I always say is, it may be hard, but it's much better to have Jesus walking with us through the valley of the shadow of death than to walk through it by ourselves. So even in the worst of circumstances, this is a great way to live, is to take our Lord and our faith to work with us.
And I fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me.
Absolutely.
Now, David, you say we need to focus on the character and mission of God. How would you define that?
I do. Well, because I think that what I talk about is alignment. The first challenge is to try to do our work in alignment with the work that God is already doing in the world. And so, and part of that is because we're challenged to walk in the ways of the Lord. I mean, in the Old Testament and New Testament, we're to follow after Jesus Christ. And so his agenda becomes our agenda. We're not God, but we do have the Spirit of God empowering us to do the work of the Lord. I also think from another perspective, we're all made in the image and likeness of God. And we follow a working God as well as a resting God. And so God's work is the primary model for what we want to accomplish in the workplace. So what is that? If we want two words, God is the creator and the redeemer. So we want in our work, whether it's in manufacturing or raising our children or being an artist, whatever it is, we want to do what results in the creation and, you might say, the production of things that God could call good, things that are good for food, but also pleasing to the eye. So we want to study God's work as creator and then align our work as much as possible to bear witness to that creation. But God doesn't just create good things, he fixes bad things. That's where the Redeemer comes in. God is the healer of the hurting, not just the creator of initial life, but the healer of hurting life. And so we want to be creative. We want to be redemptive. But also there are other images, like God is the sustainer. So I'm saying wherever we are, wherever we work, we want to sustain the people around us, help hold them up when they're falling down. And also our business. We want to help sustain our business. We want to stand behind the products that we deliver, because God doesn't just create something and walk away. He sustains what he's made. And so we want to be creators and sustainers and redeemers. And I also, in my chapter, allude to the fact that God is also the source of wisdom. He is wisdom. And we want to be the kind of people who bring wisdom to the workplace. And God is righteousness. And so we want to be people like the prophets call for. We want to be people who stand up for justice and for fairness. If somebody's being mistreated, if our customers are getting something that's not what we promised, we want to be people who stand up for what's right and what's just. And then the sixth characteristic is God is the finisher, not just the Alpha, but the Omega. God finishes the work that he's begun in us and in the world. So we want to be the kind of people who follow through in our work and finish and bring excellence and glory to God. So that's what I mean by the character of God becomes our basic philosophy of what makes for good work. Faithful to the ways of God.
So if you put it in a baseball analogy, God's not only the starting pitcher, but he's the closer as well in the game of life here. So David, why do you believe that accountability is vital to us as believers?
Well, we're accountable to God, first of all. We give an answer for how we live our lives. We believe in that from day to day, but also from the eternal perspective. You know, we're going to stand before the judgment seat of Christ and give an account. So I think that accountability is important, but we also need to be accountable to other people in our lives, you know, people who are men and women of God who can hold us accountable. And we need to invite that accountability. We don't just want a posse of people who will always just praise us for whatever we do. And we want people who love us enough to say, look, I think you shouldn't go in this direction, or we share a problem and they could say, you know, I wouldn't go this direction. And so it's on that level too, accountability to God, but also to others around us.
Now, there's a vast difference between available information at our fingertips and wisdom needed to really understand it. David, how can we really develop discernment when it comes to the two?
Well, you know, I think, first of all, the fear of the Lord's the beginning of wisdom. So that is going to be the basis. My father was a mid-level accounting executive all of his life, and he didn't go to seminary, or he actually didn't even go to college. But my dad read Proverbs every morning of his life. You know, there are 31 chapters. So every day my dad read a different chapter of Proverbs every day, all of his life. And I think, you know, that's where the wisdom comes from, you know, common sense, you might say, which is not so common. But so I think the wisdom comes there, but also it comes from a lot from perspective. You know, wisdom is from perspective, not getting lost in the details, but seeing, not just seeing the trees, but seeing the forest. And so the Bible helps us develop this kind of wisdom. It's practical knowledge and discernment. And then, of course, I also think it's from our posse, because, you know, in Romans, I love this chapter 12, where Paul says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what the will of God is, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And then he immediately says, but don't think of yourself more highly than you ought to think, but think soberly. You have one gift, but you don't have them all. So we need that community in order to figure out what is the will of God. What is that good and acceptable and perfect thing to do in my work? I need others. I can't think more highly of just my own self than I ought to.
David, what's a good biblical insight that almost anyone can share in a secular workplace? Think of one maybe right on the top of your head.
Well, servant leadership. I mean, this is something Jesus taught. You know, people in the world love to lord it over others, but I'm your Lord, and I don't do that. I'm among you as one who serves. And we're challenged to think not how to impose our leadership and lean on people like that, like a dictator or something, but instead we're here to serve people. So yes, we do need to assert leadership in the sense of holding people accountable who are working for us, or our kids as they're growing up. But we want to do it as servants. We're really here to serve God and actually to serve others as well. So that's one thing. I think this community thing is also taught from cover to cover in the Bible, that it's not good for one to dwell alone, man or woman to dwell alone. We need others. David and Jonathan made a covenant. Ruth and Naomi made a covenant to support each other. Jesus sent his disciples out 2 by 2. So I would always argue in any workplace where I am on behalf of a collaboration and teamwork, and not just doing things all by ourselves. So there is individual responsibility and capability, but we're much stronger if we always stress the importance of teams. And I would do that in my secular workplace, you could say. I wouldn't necessarily quote the Bible initially. I'd tell them later on if people ask, well, why are you so strong on teams? I would probably say, well, it comes out of my faith. But I would promote that anywhere, on a faculty or anywhere.
David, we have about 30 seconds left in the interview here. Can you suggest quickly a way to handle workplace conflict?
Well, I love the Beatitudes as a model for our own character, which can be applied to handling conflict. So the point of the whole thing is really, I think, in number 7, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. We want people to have peace with God, but peace with each other as well. Now, how do we get there? I think the Beatitudes are a progression. So it begins in being poor in spirit. We'll never be able to help people overcome conflict if they won't be humble and say, we're messed up. We need to work at this. And then from being poor in spirit goes lamenting that poverty and brokenness. Blessed are those who mourn, being meek and gentle, not trying to be the control freak in the situation. And then pursuing what is just and righteous and true. We've got to do that, but we won't see that justice if we don't start out in openness and humility. If we just plunge in and search for justice immediately without that openness, I don't think we'll get there. But justice must be accompanied by mercy, the 5th beatitude, and purity of heart, integrity, if we want to get to number 7, which is to be a peacemaker. We never look more like the children of God than when we are peacemakers. Those who are peacemakers will be called the children of God. And then number 8 is, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And this is the realism end of the Beatitude, saying even if you work this way and try to resolve conflicts, it's not always going to work. And sometimes people are going to attack you and accuse you of bad faith, but hang in there, keep working on God's righteousness agenda.
Some solid insight and wisdom. David Gill, author of Workplace Discipleship 101, thanks for joining me today from Oakland, California.
It's great to be with you, Hal. Thanks so much.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and thanks for watching.